The scream that shattered the quiet suburban night would later be remembered as the moment everything changed, the moment a daughter's frantic story collided with a truth far darker than anyone imagined. Claire Benson had spent her entire adult life caring for her only child, Emily. Their home in the peaceful town of Willow Creek was modest, tucked beneath the shade of old oak trees, its porch light always glowing like a quiet invitation. Claire, now in her mid-50s, was warm, meticulous, and deeply attached to the life she had built with her daughter. Emily, in her early 30s, still lived at home, something she often explained as temporary, though years had passed without any sign of her moving on. Friends described their bond as tight, perhaps unusually so. They shopped together, cooked together, even worked in the same small insurance office. But beneath the gentle rhythms of their life, tension simmered quietly. Arguments behind closed doors. Long silences at the dinner table. The kind of subtle friction that left neighbors wondering what really went on inside the Benson home. On the evening of Claire's birthday, the two women decided, despite their differences, to go out and celebrate. Emily had insisted. She'd planned the dinner, chosen a charming bistro downtown, even surprised her mother with a cake. To anyone watching, they seemed content, smiling under the soft glow of the restaurant's string lights. They returned home just after 9. According to Emily, they had barely settled in when she realized the car was nearly out of fuel. She left again, telling her mother she'd be right back. Claire stayed behind, still wearing the necklace Emily had given her that night, a delicate silver pendant shaped like a crescent moon. That was the last time anyone saw her alive. Emily's return was explosive. She stumbled onto her front lawn screaming for help, crying that a masked intruder had attacked her just as she walked through the door. She said she'd fought him off, that he'd fled into the darkness, and that her mother was still inside. Terrified neighbors called emergency services. Within minutes, officers were running into the Benson home, expecting a robbery gone wrong. What they found instead was a scene of chilling violence. Claire lay motionless in the living room, her injuries severe, the room disturbingly untouched except for the brutality inflicted upon her. There were no signs of a break-in. No valuables missing. No overturned furniture. Nothing to indicate the kind of chaotic struggle Emily described. And yet Emily sobbed uncontrollably on the lawn, clinging to the story of the masked intruder. While paramedics worked, detectives exchanged quiet, uneasy glances. Something felt off, terribly off. But no one could have imagined how twisted the truth would become, or how many years it would take before the secrets buried in that quiet house finally clawed their way into the light. Detectives moved methodically through the Benson home that night, their footsteps echoing softly against floors that looked almost too neat for the chaos Emily had described. The front door showed no damage. The windows were secure. Every drawer remained closed, every picture frame perfectly straight. If an intruder had come, he had slipped in and out like a ghost, leaving no mark except the fatal violence done to Claire. Outside, Emily sat wrapped in a blanket, face streaked with tears, her hands trembling as she repeated her story to first responders. "He came out of nowhere," she insisted. "A mask, dark clothes, he pushed me down. I fought back. I tried to scream." Her voice cracked, but something in her delivery felt rehearsed, as though she had walked herself through the script several times before speaking it aloud. Detective James Rowan was the first to notice the inconsistencies. Emily's clothes, though dusty from the lawn, bore no tears, no signs of a real struggle, no bruising consistent with what she described. Her hair was perfectly intact, her makeup only slightly smudged from crying. He didn't say anything yet, but he watched her closely, noting each detail with quiet precision. Inside, Claire's injuries told a different story, one of rage, not panic. Rage delivered at close range. By dawn, the intruder theory was already unraveling. Still, without direct evidence pointing elsewhere, investigators had no choice but to treat Emily as a frightened witness rather than a suspect. She was escorted to the station for a formal statement, offered water, tissues, gentle words. She kept her answers vague, her memories hazy. "It happened so fast," she murmured, staring down at her hands. "I don't remember every detail." But the silence between her sentences carried weight, thick, uneasy, calculated. As investigators dug deeper into the Benson household, a new figure emerged from Emily's tangled personal life, a man named Adam Carter. Adam was someone she kept secret, someone she defended fiercely in arguments with her mother. Claire's co-workers later revealed that she had grown increasingly worried about her daughter's relationship with him. She believed Adam was manipulative, volatile, and financially dependent on Emily. On more than one occasion, Claire had confided that he made her uneasy, that he sometimes stayed at the house when she wasn't comfortable with it. Rumors followed Adam like shadows. Unemployment. Sudden flashes of temper. A history of short-lived relationships. The kind of man who slid easily into someone's life and even more easily into their wallet. Neighbors recalled heated arguments echoing through the Benson home. Doors slamming. Raised voices, Emily's and Amanda's. Sometimes Claire's. And then there was the pressure, the relentless insistence that the family home be sold. Claire had refused every time, clinging to the place where she'd raised her child, where memories lived in every corner. But Emily and Adam, according to one neighbor, seemed determined to push the idea. Money. Stability. Escape. Whatever their motives, the tension was undeniable. When detectives asked Emily about Adam, she grew instantly defensive. "Why bring him into this?" she snapped through tears. "He had nothing to do with it." Nothing. But her reaction only deepened their suspicion. Within 24 hours of the murder, the investigation shifted quietly. No longer were detectives looking for a masked stranger disappearing into the night. They were looking at the daughter who told the story. And at the man she defended more fiercely than she had defended her own mother. In the weeks following Claire Benson's death, the investigation became a slow, grinding battle against silence. Emily maintained her story with unwavering resolve, repeating every detail as though reading from a script she refused to alter. Adam, when questioned, mirrored her calm defiance. He denied having been at the house, denied any conflict with Claire, denied knowing anything that could help. Without physical evidence linking either of them to the crime, detectives hit a wall. The community of Willow Creek grew restless. How could a woman be killed in her own home, on her own birthday, with no suspect caught and no lead strong enough to pursue? Candlelight vigils were held. Neighbors whispered uneasily on sidewalks. For a while, the case felt like an open wound no one could heal. But inside the police department, Detective Rowan refused to let the case fade. He revisited every statement, every photograph, every trace of evidence from that night. Still, the story Emily told, the masked intruder, the ambush at the door, remained unsupported by a single shred of proof. Then came the financial records. In the months before Claire's death, large and frequent withdrawals had been made from her bank account. Transfers Emily had initiated, on her mother's behalf, though Claire's signature was noticeably missing from several documents. The money had gone, almost entirely, to Adam, for rent, for bills, for debts he refused to explain. When confronted, Emily waved the issue away. "Mom wanted to help him," she insisted. "She knew we were planning a future." But Claire's friends told a different story. They described her as distraught, worried that Emily was being manipulated, pressured, used. She had spoken more than once of her fear that something terrible was going to happen if Emily didn't break things off. One friend even recalled Claire's final week. She said Emily wasn't herself anymore, the woman whispered. Like she was living for him, not for her own life. Detectives pieced together a troubling pattern, arguments escalating in intensity, Adam's increasing presence in the home, Emily's rejection of anyone who questioned him. And then there was the matter of the house. Emily had spoken to a realtor 2 weeks before her mother's death, asking how quickly a sale could be processed. Her mother had known nothing about it. When investigators pressed Emily on this, she claimed it had been just curiosity. The case grew darker, stranger, more tangled. The motive, financial gain intertwined with an unhealthy romantic dependency, was becoming clearer, yet still not provable. Months passed. Then a year. Then 3. With no new leads, the case was eventually classified as cold. Boxes of evidence were stacked neatly into archives, their labels fading with time. Claire Benson's name slowly slipped from the public eye, except for those who loved her, and those who refused to let her story die. Adam eventually moved away, drifting from job to job, city to city. Emily remained in Willow Creek, living quietly, never charged, never cleared, forever marked by suspicion. She rarely spoke to anyone, living like a shadow inside the home that had once belonged to her mother, a home she finally managed to put on the market, though it never sold. A decade passed. Seasons changed. Technology advanced. And then, unexpectedly, everything shifted. A newly funded forensic initiative in the state reopened dozens of cold cases, including Claire Benson's. Evidence long considered too small, too degraded to test was re-examined using cutting-edge technology. Among the items was the outfit Emily had worn the night of the murder, carefully sealed, untouched since the initial investigation. Under improved forensic analysis, something startling emerged. On the inside hem of Emily's shirt was a minute smear of Claire's blood. Not visible to the naked eye. Missed entirely by older testing methods. And entangled within the fibers of her clothing were microscopic biological traces belonging to Adam Carter, in places that suggested close, physical proximity at the time Claire was attacked. The emotions investigators had suppressed for years, frustration, suspicion, anger, came rushing back. The evidence was clear. Emily had not been attacked outside the house. She had been inside when her mother was killed. Close. Too close. Close enough to be part of the violence. And Adam had been there with her. The door to the truth, sealed for so long, had suddenly cracked open. Detective Rowan, now older and carrying the weight of unsolved cases like stones in his pockets, stared at the new forensic report with stunned disbelief. Claire's blood on the inside of Emily's clothing. Adam's biological trace woven into the fabric, exactly where it should not have been if Emily's story were true. For the first time in years, Rowan felt the unmistakable tremor of a case shifting, the truth rising from the dust. He contacted Emily for a follow-up discussion. She arrived at the station looking smaller than he remembered, worn down by the years, her hair streaked with early gray. But her eyes had the same guarded shine, the same brittle defiance. "We just need to clarify a few things," he said gently, sliding a photograph of the test results across the table. Emily's breath hitched the moment she saw her mother's name printed alongside the forensic findings. A flicker of panic sharpened her features before she forced her expression back into place. "I don't understand," she whispered. "That night was chaos, maybe he grabbed my shirt in the struggle." "No," Rowan said softly. "Not where the stains were found. Not how they were deposited." Emily swallowed hard, her jaw trembling. Then the intruder. There was never an intruder. Silence fell like a hammer. Her fingers curled into fists. Rowan watched her carefully. "Emily, we can see you were inside the house. And you weren't alone." A single tear slipped down her cheek, but she wiped it away quickly, almost angrily. "Adam had nothing to do with this," she said. "Leave him out of it." But Adam was already being questioned in another room, though he barely knew it. Rowan's partner, Detective Hart, sat across from him, presenting the same evidence. Adam, once cocky and abrasive, appeared frightened, genuinely foggy. He struggled to recall even simple details. Because Adam, at this point in his life, was no longer the man he once had been. Years of deterioration had left his memories fractured. He blinked as though waking from a dream he couldn't name. I don't remember that night," he admitted, pressing his fingers to his temples. "Emily told me about it. I think she said it was a break-in. She said her mother was gone." "But were you there?" Hart asked. Adam's eyes filled with confusion, then fear. I don't know. It was clear he wasn't lying. His mind, damaged beyond repair, had become a maze without exits. While Adam's interrogation brought no clarity, other pieces of the puzzle surfaced. Witnesses long hesitant to speak finally came forward. Time had softened their fear, strengthened their resolve. One neighbor reported seeing Emily's car leave the driveway earlier than she claimed, shortly before the supposed fuel run, which suggested she had staged her timeline. Another recalled hearing raised voices, a man's and a woman's, shortly after Emily and Claire returned home that night. And then came the most damning statement. A former acquaintance of Emily shared that, years ago, Emily confessed she was tired of the fighting, that she and Adam were looking for a way to get free, and that everything would be easier once the house was ours. Not long after, Emily had abruptly cut ties with that friend. One by one, the bricks of her story crumbled. The emerging portrait was chilling, a woman financially entangled with a controlling partner, consumed by resentment toward her mother, desperate for independence and money, and willing to orchestrate a deadly plan to get both. Investigators concluded that Emily hadn't simply witnessed the crime, she had been part of it. Whether she struck the fatal blows or held Claire down, she had been close. Intimately close. The staged break-in, the scream on the lawn, the rehearsed panic, all of it was a performance meant to mask the truth. After reviewing the new forensic evidence and sworn witness accounts, the district attorney authorized an arrest warrant. On the morning officers arrived at the Benson home, the sky was gray, the air heavy with the promise of rain. Emily answered the door with a vacant stare, as though she'd sensed this day coming for years. "Emily Benson," Rowan said quietly, "you're under arrest for the murder of your mother, Claire Benson." Her shoulders sagged, just slightly. No denial. No protest. Just a long, shuddering exhale, the breath of someone whose secrets had finally turned on her. As the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, the first drops of rain began to fall. And somewhere, deep behind her distant eyes, the mask of the grieving daughter dissolved into something raw and unmistakable, the fear of a truth that could no longer be escaped. The trial of Emily Benson became the most anticipated courtroom event Willow Creek had witnessed in decades. Reporters filled the benches, their pens poised, townspeople lined up outside the courthouse before dawn each day. After so many years of silence and suspicion, people wanted answers, and justice. Emily entered the courtroom wearing a plain gray suit, her wrists trembling as she held them together like a protective gesture. Her once bright eyes had dulled, shadowed by sleepless nights. She glanced briefly at the gallery but avoided the faces of Claire's former friends and co-workers, many of whom had come to watch the case unfold. The prosecution opened with quiet confidence. "This is a case about betrayal," the district attorney said, stepping before the jury. "A daughter who chose financial gain and loyalty to a manipulative partner over the life of her own mother." They presented the forensic evidence first, the microscopic traces found on Emily's clothing. Scientists explained how the blood pattern could only have been deposited at extremely close range, during the act itself or moments after. Emily's attorney objected frequently, trying to cast doubt on the reliability of the new technology. But the jury leaned forward, absorbing every word. Then came the recordings of Emily's 911 call. Her tone, frantic but strangely controlled, filled the courtroom. When played alongside body cam footage from that night, the contrast between the violently staged scene and Emily's immaculate appearance became impossible to ignore. Witness after witness took the stand. A neighbor described hearing arguing inside the house shortly after Emily and Claire returned from dinner. Another testified that Emily had previously asked how quickly a home could be sold after a relative passed away. A former friend recounted Emily's bitter complaints, how she said she felt trapped, how things would be easier once the house was in her name. Each statement added another stone to the growing mountain of evidence. And then came the man at the center of it all, Adam Carter. He was escorted in by officers, his posture fragile, his gaze unfocused. Age and illness had hollowed him out. When he took the stand, the courtroom fell silent, breath held in collective anticipation. But Adam was not the person he once had been. His memory flickered like a faulty bulb. He recognized Emily when pointed out, but his recollection of the past was fragmented. "I remember, she loved me," he murmured. "We talked about money, about moving. I think she was angry with her mother. I can't remember everything." The prosecution treated him gently, aware of his deteriorated state. They presented evidence that tied him to the crime, but they did not paint him as the mastermind, only as a participant whose mind had since dimmed beyond legal responsibility. The defense latched onto Adam's memory loss, arguing that without his testimony, there was no definitive proof of Emily's involvement. But the prosecution countered with clarity: the forensic evidence was irrefutable, and Emily's own inconsistencies filled the gaps. When Emily chose to testify, the courtroom leaned in. She walked to the stand with measured steps, her chin lifted a fraction too high, her attempt at poise wobbling under the weight of the moment. "I loved my mother," she began. "I would never hurt her." But as questioning deepened, her answers wavered. "I don't remember. I might have been inside. Everything happened so fast." Her voice cracked under pressure, revealing cracks in the facade she had worn for so many years. Finally, the prosecutor asked the question everyone had been waiting for: "Emily, if an intruder never existed, then who killed your mother?" Her lips trembled. For a moment, it seemed she might admit something, anything. But instead, she lowered her gaze and whispered, "I can't say. I don't know." It was the closest she ever came to confession. After weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for 10 hours. When they returned, the room went silent enough to hear a pin drop. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Emily Benson, guilty of murder in the first degree." Emily closed her eyes, her face collapsing into a silent, shaking sorrow, not the grief of a daughter losing her mother, but the terror of someone whose carefully constructed lies had finally shattered. She was sentenced to life in prison, with eligibility for parole decades in the future. As she was led away, rain streaked down the courthouse windows, echoing the night the truth had first begun to surface. In the months that followed the verdict, the Benson case became a lingering echo across Willow Creek, a story retold in hushed voices at grocery counters, whispered over back fences, murmured between neighbors who still wrestled with disbelief. How had a quiet family, so ordinary on the surface, carried such darkness beneath? The Benson home sat empty for nearly a year after the trial. The once warm windows, where Claire used to display seasonal wreaths, now reflected nothing but silence. A "for sale" sign eventually appeared in the lawn, its edges flapping in the wind like a forgotten flag. Few buyers showed interest. Whispers of what had happened inside those walls clung to the property like a shadow. Claire's friends gathered often in the early aftermath, sharing memories of her kindness, her meticulous handwritten cards for birthdays, her warm laugh that always arrived before her smile. They planted a small garden in her honor at the local park, a quiet place where lilies bloomed each spring, their petals opening like soft reminders of a life cut short. For Detective Rowan, the closure was bittersweet. He had carried the weight of the case for so many years that seeing it resolved felt like setting down a heavy stone he had grown accustomed to bearing. Yet the victory was tempered by the tragedy at its core: a mother betrayed, a daughter lost to her own choices, a life ended long before justice intervened. Adam Carter, the mysterious and corrosive presence at the center of the storm, faded into a quiet, fragmented existence. His mind continued to unravel, drifting through the crumbling corridors of memory where the truth flickered but never stayed. Legally unfit for prosecution, he lived out his remaining years under supervised care, a man whose role in the tragedy would never be fully articulated, not by him, and not by the courts. His silence, voluntary or not, became yet another unanswered question in a case already thick with them. Emily adjusted to life in prison with a strange, almost eerie stillness. She kept mostly to herself, her days marked by routine, early wake-ups, work assignments, lights out. But guards noted the moments when she would pause during meal lines or recreation time, her expression tight, as though the past had reached out and brushed against her shoulder. Some inmates tried to ask about the crime. Emily never answered. Her voice, once sharp and defensive, had quieted into something ghost-like. Her world had shrunk to walls she could no longer escape, the physical manifestation of the choices she once believed she could outrun. Every year, on Claire's birthday, a small group gathered at the memorial garden. They would bring fresh flowers, sometimes candles, sometimes just a quiet moment. Rowan attended most years, though he stayed toward the back, watching the sunlight sift through the leaves above the blossoms. It reminded him that even in the darkest stories, there were still places where light could filter through. Willow Creek, though forever marked by the crime, eventually found its rhythm again. New families moved in, children rode bikes down winding lanes, porch lights flickered on at dusk like warm, amber fireflies returning home. Life, as it always does, continued, resilient, steady, persistent. But the memory of the Benson case lived on in the collective conscience of the town. Teachers referenced it in lessons about decision-making. Clergy used it as an example of how unnoticed tensions can grow into devastating tragedies. And parents told it in cautionary tones, reminding their children that danger isn't always a stranger in the dark. Sometimes, heartbreakingly, it begins within the walls we trust the most. In the end, the story of Claire and Emily became more than a crime. It became a reminder of the fragile threads that bind families together, and how quickly those threads can fray when love turns into resentment, and partnership into control. And as the years passed, one truth remained unmistakably clear. Sometimes the most devastating betrayals can grow quietly, patiently, right inside the home we believe is safest.